Thank you. Hi, hello, everybody. Welcome to a topic I'm very, very passionate about and got very lucky to be able to moderate this topic. So I'm gonna level set, that's a shitty corporate word, so I'm gonna get us all on the same page. We're gonna do this cafecito style. So everybody familiar with cafecito? So we don't need a cafecito. We're not having cafecito because cafecito doesn't need cafecito. It just needs good conversation. So that's how we're gonna do this. I'm really gonna try to drive conversation across these extraordinary panelists that I'm so lucky to be among. So the way I'd like to start this is by letting every panelist share their story. I'm gonna tell you what happened to me. So I was lucky enough, and thank you, Kat, for allowing me to host this panel, and I usually, as all creatives do, you're like, how am I gonna do this? Let me put it together. Okay, I have this idea, and then I have this other one, and spent hours and hours coming up with ideas about how to do this panel. And then I was like, I'm gonna run out of time. I better start calling these people. And so I got on the phone, and something extraordinary happened, which was, after every conversation I had, my perspective around something had changed forever. Like, they changed my mind, my 45-year-old mind around something. And I was like, well, I don't know what you call that, but I call that visionaries. And that's what these people are. They're visionaries, and they're driving a vision forth. So I'd like to have each one of them introduce themselves with what inspires them and drives them every day to share their vision with the world and to change people. We'll start with Louise.
What inspires me and drives me every single day is a very profound experience I had as a plus-size woman joining a running clinic 15 years ago. This was before Instagram and Facebook, and I had never seen a woman with a body like mine in any media or advertising as a runner. So it was kind of this mystery. Am I going to fail? Am I going to be able to do it? I felt like I was going on a Christopher Columbus expedition. I didn't know if I was going to return. And that night, the run leader stood up in front of us and introduced herself, and she was a plus-size woman. And she was a plus-size woman that wasn't trying to lose weight through fitness. She wasn't trying to lose weight at all. And I was so taken back by that concept. I was like, you're just doing this for exercise? Like, you're just doing this to feel good and feel empowered? And I trained with her for 12 weeks. I ran the 5K. I went to do 10Ks and half marathons and triathlons, and eventually left my job as a talent agent to pursue fitness full time and spread the gospel that your athletic dreams are not tethered to a body size.
Lisa?
Well, what a great question. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have middle schoolers or high schoolers in your life? Yeah, me too. That's part of what drives me. So I'm really in love with my kids. Like, flat out, 100%, adore them, greatest thing that ever happened to me. I go to pick up my son, he was still in middle school, and he gets in the car and he's got his baseball gear bag on, he's got his backpack, and then I look, being the observant parent that I am, and realize he's got a tiara on. So I look at him with the tiara on, and I said, wow, you're really rocking that tiara. You know, I mean, I wasn't sure quite what else to say. And he said, yeah, right? And I said, oh, so what's the story about the tiara? And he tells me this story, and he had his baseball cap on, there was a girl, and so there was some reciprocity, some exchange there. And I thought, okay, that was the end of the tiara story. The next morning, we're getting in the car to go to school, and he's got the tiara on again. And I said, oh, sort of surprised to see the tiara. And he said, well, why are you surprised to see the tiara? I thought we agreed I look amazing in the tiara. And I said, well, we did agree on that. I just thought it was kind of a yesterday thing, not a everyday thing. And he said, you know, boys can wear tiaras, right? Like, you know that. And I said, yeah, I spend a little bit of my time thinking about and talking about gender, so I'm you know, I'm aware of that. And I thought about that a lot in the work that we do. You know, the rules around gender are being rewritten. The millennials, first generation that see gender as a spectrum, not as a binary. That's really exciting to me. But if we think the millennials are upsetting this gender conversation, it is nothing like those of you that have middle schoolers and high schoolers. It is upside down. They see it totally differently. And unlike many women in this audience where we have been exceedingly patient for gender representation and pay equity and those kinds of things that have mattered to us, these kids are not patient. They expect that people are going to see what's possible, that they will be the possibility. So the thing that gets me excited every day is imagining this world with these people in it and what might happen that instead of constricting ourselves to fit into notions of who we're supposed to be, losing all along the way who we actually are, what might be unleashed, right? The possibilities in each of us, the creativity, because it isn't just colors that get gendered and professions that get gendered, but it's thoughts and creativity and our actions. And what if we liberate all of that and live into the possibility of each of us? So that's what gets me excited every day. And I think that the world that's coming, and maybe again, the arc of the universe is long, but the place that we're going to, I think, can be really liberating for all of us. So I'm really excited.
I know. That's how I was when I was on the phone. I was clapping and jumping in my living room.
That's a hard follow-up, but I'll give my story. I'm a photographer and creative director of a platform called TONL, and it's a culturally diverse photo stock company. How many of you guys love stock photography? Nobody? That's cool. But basically, I didn't grow up thinking like, hey, I'm gonna be a stock photographer. That wasn't my dream or goal. I started out in fashion and lifestyle and saw a need for stories to be told that were diverse and represented underrepresented populations. So basically, TONL started on a more sad note, but it started 2 years ago at the unfortunate murders of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, blissed through the media. And all the images I saw were images that were stereotypical, that labeled them as bad people. And as a photographer, I thought to myself, like, what can I do to change the narrative when it comes to imagery and how we've seen how imagery just changed our whole perspective. We're always on our phones, we're on Instagram, where like imagery is our everyday, and it's only become more and more important. So TONL's whole mission was to change what stock photography has looked like, because from media platforms to commercials to advertising to billboards, this is what we see every day. So our whole ethos is like, hey, story over stock. Like, nobody's just a stock anything, like, you know. So we're like thinking like, how could we take this mundane industry and bring some life into it? So we come with this whole narrative of showing people and showing the world how it's supposed to appear through imagery. So I've traveled a bunch of places and shot so many different types of people who identify themselves as different types of representation and just be able to show who they are. So we don't try to dictate what should be told. We let people tell their stories through narratives. And it's been a really, really powerful tool and kind of like this creative activism, because in a sense, creativity sometimes is only told in a bubble, but it's like, what does creativity looks like when you're empowering other people? And that's what TONL's whole platform is about.
Amazing.
This is Mina.
Hi, I'm Mina. I am half Middle Eastern and I'm half Latina, and I'm 14. And I am lucky enough to grow up in a family and with friends who've always been really racially and ethnically diverse and just open-minded. But as soon as I kind of walk out of my little awesome bubble, I see all this kind of media that is not so diverse and that is not so inclusive and welcoming. And so that is why, and I know that there are people who weren't put in the same situations that I was where I'm always told, like, you are amazing and being different is not a bad thing. So that's why I'm kind of dedicated to more representation, is because I want to make sure that other people have the opportunities that I did.
Great. I'm Gina, and going after this morning, I tried to get their attention. I'm proud. I am 75. I'm at the other end of the spectrum from what was talked about, young people being impatient. Believe me, when you are 75, you are frigging impatient. You don't have enough time to go slow, to make change at the rate that people say, oh, why aren't your goals a little more modest? Forget it. So for me, this is a cartoon which my husband puts on Facebook every year, which he thinks represents who I am, and is basically true. What inspires me is young people. I have a 14-year-old grandson. We are now trying to produce a podcast called Grandma Grandson. To share the differences that we experience when I was his age and what he might experience when he's my age. I guess I have many stories, but over the past couple of years, I think we've all experienced some very difficult times, especially around gender politics, gender issues. And I look back at this 14-year-old now, for when he was 3, he announced at the dining room table that he knew God was a woman.
That's right.
So my daughter said, well, why is that? And he said, God made people, and only mommies can make people.
Oh.
I figure if he's the future, that's good. You're the future, that's great. And so building activists is part of what I hope to do through this organization I started in my dotage, is to give tools identified with GenderAvenger so that individuals can impact the way women are seen and gain power in today's world.
So the first thing I wanted to kind of bring to the table, and because I thought, well, what a great opportunity us as creatives and brand leaders and how we're talking about diversity, and furthermore, how we understand diversity. When I first came to this country, I came to do Hispanic advertising, and so that's why I came. I came from Mexico. I'm a border kid from the Mexican side, from the wrong side of the fence. As some people might think, and I came here to do that, and it was like, okay, and then all of a sudden in 5 years it was like, okay, it became a color thing. So all of a sudden the general market agency started saying like, oh well, we could put multicultural people in our ad, and you guys just repurpose it, right? Then it's a diverse ad, and it was like, wait, we're missing the biggest opportunity. Is to be culturally relevant, right? And what is really representation? How are we understanding diversity? And how are we owning up and being responsible, but owning up to the role we have as brands and as creative stewards of those brands, taking them forward in our understanding of diversity. So I would like to start with you, Lisa, and you, Louise, on how might a brand understand diversity and really bring it forward in the gender situation, for example?
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to do is really, first of all, understand gender. And we often think we do, and I would propose that we don't as much as we think we do. What's interesting is that often when I'm working with a man, he will start with saying, I really don't get gender. Women will start with, I get gender, and I would actually say that oftentimes that's really not true. In fact, I had a conversation not that long ago with the global head of diversity and inclusion with a big global tech company, And right after she got done telling me how much they've got gender handled, she made 3 of the most gender stereotypical comments that I had heard in a really long time. So I think the first thing is to understand that gender's always been more complex than physiology, right? And that we need to understand that because how people identify really expands much more beyond that. But also the demographics are changing. So if we look at millennials today, for example, in recent research, we've got about 12% of them identify as transgender or gender expansive in some way or another. That's a lot. If you look at the next generation coming up, there was some research in California, but it's been verified in other places. About 27% of youth said that their peers identify or see them as being gender non-conforming in some way. And then if you even expand that to those that are girls, for example, but see that wide spectrum, you realize that this is really a different issue than we've thought about it. And the possibilities are really significant. From a brand standpoint, I think taking that into account, but realizing that the binary really doesn't hold in the way that it used to. And so some of the opportunity too is to speak about likes and dislikes and not speak to gender about those and not gender those things. And I think there's a really significant opportunity. And I think to connect, like maybe the last point I'll say on that is I think to connect everybody to their own gender story. I think some of the ways in which we have not made the progress that we would like to in terms of equality for women is that we've allowed gender to be seen as a women's issue. As if it's philanthropy for men and other people to do something, right? That is, it's not only good business sense, but they're not, the skin is not in the game. It's interesting research that shows that both men and women will acknowledge there are differences between men and women in the workplace, but the majority of men attribute that to biology, and the majority of women attribute that to social construction around gender. And part of that is because we're not connecting men to their own gender story. They too have a gender. And as long as they think that these differences are biology and that they have not too been affected by the construction of gender, and they too have been damaged by that construction of gender, then they're never going to own it. And it stays as a philanthropic effort that wouldn't it be nice to have that, but not essential. And I would say that I think if we can change that connection and we realize we all have a gender, we all have a gender story, and begin to connect with our own story and help other people do that as well, that then we'll be able to think about branding in completely different ways, and especially looking at our own lenses and our own biases that we bring that further perpetuate these gender constructs that are really damaging to everybody.
So, when I heard Lisa talk to me about those things, I felt, I did nothing but further the cause in the wrong sense by not even starting to understand what it meant. And then when I spoke to Louise about how poorly we are representing plus-size women in athletics and the impacts of that. Could you talk to us? Could you share with us?
Well, I think one of the things to really look at is the numbers of women that are plus size. Reports will say 67% of women in America are over a size 14 or a size 14. So when I did some rough math around that, that's about 84 million women that are virtually invisible in athletic advertising. So what typically we've seen in athletic advertising is her as a before picture and something that is different for an after picture, so that there's an aspiration to be something else. And I think what would be really liberating to see more of is, for one, just seeing her in a light that's celebratory, and that she is somebody that wants to exercise and actually has great athletic ability. But also to not assume that she is on a warpath to be a smaller version of herself. And so really changing the health message to not have this really stringent ideal.
And the impacts of that. Can you talk about the impacts of that to that whole community and group?
I think it just goes to the quote that we all know and love, I do anyway. You cannot be what you cannot see. And if you cannot see yourself in any fitness or athletic advertising, It's an unspoken message that you're not invited, that this isn't for you, that you should be the before picture and conform to what we think is acceptable. So this person is being widely rejected from getting into the game at all, and that has a high impact on women's health.
So when I was hearing about the impact on health, and I actually went through some life-changing experience for me for the first time in my life, feeling as a minority, coming from Hispanic advertising. Well, I was always the majority, right? Because I lived in Hispanic advertising agencies. And she talked about the health, and I thought, well, we've been trying to make the business case. And now I'm sure somebody's gonna come up with the case for health, right? Why it has health consequences. What are the health consequences of not representing minorities and not being inclusive, right? But why can't we just do it because it's the right thing to do for a change? Right? How about that? And that's what I mean when I mean about visionaries. So Josh started telling me why he was doing it, because it's the right thing to do, and about the narratives. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. So on TONL, a lot of our subjects are people who actually follow the platform. So it's bigger than just stock photography. It's like, hey, we believe in what you guys believe in, and we want to be a part of that. So one of our subjects, her name is Nadumo. She has albinism, and she literally emailed us, and she goes to Yale, and she was just like, hey, I want to be the first person of albinism on your platform. And it's like, that's some of the giftings and blessings that you get when you're just doing the right thing, because it's the right thing, as you just mentioned. So you don't have to go and try to figure out like what kind of mediums do we need to come to when people are just local ambassadors of themselves. So whatever that otherness is, they use that as an opportunity to empower other people like them. So we met up, we took photos, and she was a little bit nervous because she's never been in front of the camera too much. But we went to Grand Central, and she celebrated her albinism. And we talked about colorism and the fact that her skin is so light, but she identifies as a Black woman. So there are so many different dialogues going on that I'm learning as well, just being behind the lens, and as well as capturing other people's stories, knowing that it's not about me here, it's about this person's story. How do I show that in the most authentic way? So it gives us space for people to exist, and to me that's the most important part, because people don't exist, they don't have a voice. We kind of have what's happening right now, this frustration where everything just throttles to the top. So TONL's whole ethos is just like letting people tell their stories, and it just so happens that you could buy this imagery, but it's really about people's stories.
Beautiful.
So when you think about doing the right thing, Mina, for your generation, what does that mean? What are the impacts that you think, and when you guys see it from your perspective, that Gen Z generation, what do you think about brands who are just doing the right thing? They're not out for any campaigns.
I mean, I think that is more and more what brands need to be doing in order to appeal, because, I mean, my generation, we've grown up in an era of technology and where everything is convenient, you know? Everything is, you can click a button and have something come within the next day or the next 2 days. So brands need to start kind of making themselves stand out and be different if they want to be noticed. And I think that for my generation especially, doing the right thing and being transparent and honest about your intentions is just the best way to appeal. Because, and it's not even about, I mean, everyone makes mistakes. Brands are bound to make mistakes, but it's that level of it's just being genuine and being honest in your attempts, and I think that's what really connects to us.
Wow.
So, and Gina, when you went right off of Mina and you said, oh, I'm at the other end of the spectrum, and I loved that Kat opened up this morning reminding us about how diversity makes a better workplace and just better creativity. We have 5 generations in the workplace, and how teams are really benefiting from that diversity of thought leadership. How do you guys feel how is the media being responsible towards your group or not? And what are the consequences of that for that community?
Well, I don't feel like I'm that woman who's falling down and yelling for help. I don't feel like I'm that woman who needs adult diapers. I mean, you know, basically, the branding all seems to be about the sort of degradation or the debilitation of old people. And, you know, Sally Krawcheck this morning told us, you know, we are the future of wealth. And so not being able to see ourselves as consumers through branding means someone's missing out on taking advantage, frankly, of our wealth. I think that, and I believe it, that having old people, and I'd like to redefine old, it's not a bad thing, it's just what you are, as part of any creative team, will bring a perspective, just as you want a diverse team. Well, diverse should include age. And I'd like to make one more point if I could, because
yes.
when you are also 75, you have a lot to learn, because you grew up in a very different world than we live in today. And someone kindly this morning apparently said something about the GenderAvenger app. I just want to tell you a story because of what I learned. It does many things, but one of the things it does is you can put into this, when you're looking at a panel, the number of men, the number of women of color, and the number of non-binary individuals who are on the panel. And then you can generate a pie chart, and based on the outcome, you can be called a thunderstorm of gender inequality, you can be called cloudy with a chance of patriarchy, or you can be called the future is bright. But here's what I learned. When I started GenderAvenger, it was binary. There were men and there were women. I knew I had to figure out how to bring in women of color. And I was taught by a friend who I went to, and I said, race is very complicated for me. How am I going to do this? And what she said was, the fact that you have it, that you put it into your app, it's fine if someone is misidentified. You don't have to try to define it. Just acknowledge the importance of it by having it there. And then our webmaster identifies as gender fluid. And she kept pressing me about ensuring that we included a non-binary category, even though I kept saying, well, there'd be probably so few. She said, I don't care. And it was a great lesson for me. And I will tell you that we did a survey of our community and doubled the number of people of color who subscribe to our newsletter since we added women of color. Wow. And I just think it's a great lesson for someone like me who's a little nervous, perhaps, about doing something wrong in the arena in which we did not grow up, and learning that being transparent, first of all, about my nervousness, but secondly, about being out there and saying, I acknowledge the value. And I think it's something that has to be done by people in the ad industry about older people, is acknowledging the value.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us. And my whole process in this and hearing all of that was like, ugh. I was very depressed because then I thought, we've been doing it all wrong. Ugh. Why are we not seeing really the diversity, and why have we as much, even as minorities, when we understand that representation matters, why are we not representing the spectrum and the truth of the world we live in and the world we interact with every day? And so what I really want this cafecito to do at the end, and for you guys to take away, is ideas and stories, inspiring stories from them about what they have done to really drive change. And I know you have an excellent story around that, Louise. And what have you done physically? What actions are you doing right now to drive change in the industry? Who are you partnering with? Who's doing it right?
Well, right now I'm building the first size-inclusive, all-accessible, body-positive fitness app on the market. So you will not have to enter your weight when you join, which a lot of them ask you to do. It doesn't offer you a calorie burn because it's not what it's all about in this app. The trainers in the app will be of size diversity and ethnic diversity. There'll be lots of diversity. We'll be offering exercises for people that are starting in a chair, because really if you are losing your mobility right now, there's really limited fitness options for people to even have a fighting chance at getting back into a mobile position. So, you know, the fitness apps on the market are very, you know, just exactly how the fitness industry is presented. They're hardcore. They're all about, you know, the calorie burn and how, you know, how much you can exert. And we are not meeting the needs of these, as I said, 80 million women. So that is what I'm working on right now.
Beautiful. Well, you know, we do lots of training, consulting, and educating, but maybe let me tell a personal story about that, that sort of speaks to that, because it stands out for me. I had a conversation. So part of our philosophy of our work is we don't talk publicly about who we work with unless they do. In part because we really want to create a safe space for people to have a conversation, to not, as you said, Gina, so beautifully, not be worried about making a mistake. And so I was in a conversation with an executive at a tech company, a man, and it started off, the conversation, we had about a half hour scheduled, and he started off and he said, you know, honestly, I don't get gender. I don't get it. I know I'm supposed to. I know I really do want to have us do better. And I said, well, tell me a little bit, like, what brought us to this conversation? Was it, you know, one of your colleagues? And he said, no, it's my son. At dinner, basically shamed me into acknowledging that, like, I really don't know anything about gender, and I'm a dinosaur, and I'm hurting people. Was basically how his kid eloquently framed that for him. And he said, but it did get me to thinking that I need to not take so much time in figuring out what I'm going to do. And so I said, well, let's start with your gender story. And he said, I really don't have a gender story. I said, everyone has a gender story. Tell me what your earliest memory is of getting a message around gender. And it did not take us more than 2 or 3 minutes until this man was 8 years old, and he was talking about his passion for cooking, and he loved to cook. He thought about food, he thought about cooking, and he loved being in the kitchen at the holidays with his mom and his aunties, and he was talking about that. And at age 8, he was told that wasn't appropriate for boys, that he needed to move where the boys and the men were. And he realized, as we were talking, he said, you know, when that happened, I didn't just give up the holiday cooking, I gave up my passion for food. And as he started talking about that, he began to follow a line of all the other ways in which he gave up passions, interests, the ways in which he began to lose contact with himself. And at the end of this, which then went about an hour or so, he said, I don't regret my life and where I am. I have a good life, and I have a lot to be thankful for. But he said, until this conversation, I thought I authored my own life. And I realized I didn't. That I've been constrained in ways that I didn't realize. And he said, like almost a beat later, he said, what the hell have I done to my kids? And then he said, and what am I doing, like, to my company? And all of a sudden, that connection, gender became his story, right? He just had not connected that. And his love for his family was immediate too, and he thought, I need to go call my kids, you know, I mean, some of them were in college and things like that. But he also got the connection that it matters, that there are people in his company that are also leaving huge parts of themselves out of the workplace. They're not bringing their full selves, and that was his connection then. And I think, so, you know, we do lots of things, but ultimately that's what we're trying to get to in one way or another.
You know, when she told me this story, I thought, like, oh my God, I did all these casting specs for all of these wrong scenes. Do you know, like, what is our responsibility in this? Josh, what are you doing that you're excited about, that makes you feel like you're driving action in your mission?
Well, I think being on this panel has been very informative. Like, I'm already thinking of ideas that I need to go back to just to create a more inclusive environment outside of me and my co-founder's perspective. But more people's stories, like a story that just told this kind of elevates the relation to like me feeling like, okay, as a heterosexual male, like what is my gender story? I was just thinking through that, like what is my first memories of that like acclamation of being a male. So I think for us, it's just building up more stories, more narratives, because it's better to let people do that.
Yeah.
And we really want to champion that instead of us doing that. So it's really a community-based creative activism for people to feel more a part, and whatever their otherness is becomes a normality for other people as well.
Thank you.
So I was having a conversation with my dad a couple months ago about the midterms and just kind of elections in general. And it was right when I was first starting to see the big push towards voting for the midterms that just passed. And we were talking and he was kind of like, oh yeah, he used to be very active in like voting pushes. And that's kind of how he has seen a lot of activism manifest. And I was kind of maybe voicing a little bit of disappointment because I'm 14, I can't vote. And so that's something that I really see as being one of the biggest ways that you can make change, which is a little disheartening because it almost gives the message of there's not much you can do until you're 18, until you're an adult. And we were talking through it, and what we eventually kind of settled on was this idea of voting is definitely not the only way to get active, and until I turn 18 and am a legal adult and able to do stuff that is maybe a little bit more meaningful, my role in changing the world is to really educate and like make sure that ignorance is kept at a low, and just make sure that the people that I interact with kind of are prepared for when they are able to do these things and are prepared to go be able to speak to others. So I think that's how I'm changing the world right now, is just spreading education.
Oh, that's great.
Woo!
Well, thank heavens for
Yes.
what you're doing and when you're going to be 18. Because let me put a brutal fact on the, on the page here. Tomorrow we will publish some tallies, and it will show even though 117 women were elected to Congress, that's 26% of our representation in Congress. So when you get to vote, maybe we can double that and get close to parity.
Yeah.
So, it won't surprise you that, my activism is around this organization I, started when I was 72. And the important part of it, though, is it's about individuals taking action. It's about individuals becoming activists and feeling that they have the power to make change. If you tweet out a GenderAvenger, app that says that conference had no women keynoters, some organizer at that conference who doesn't want to be known for being insensitive might just start a new conversation in their organization. But I want to bring it back to the advertising industry. I know I'm supposed to be up here as the old person talking about making sure old people are part of your branding, but part of that is when you work with clients and they sponsor a conference, that's part of their brand. And if that conference has no women on stage or has 20% of the speakers are women, that's going to hurt their brand. Because I believe and have seen that people think their voices are valued when their voices are heard on stage. And so I think that branding is more than just an ad. It's what you put forward as your values when you support various organizations, as has been discussed previously, and various conferences, and whether they are giving women's voices and women of color voices during that conference. And non-binary. Let me not, I mean, the diversity that people bring to a conference is part of the brand that sponsors bring.
Thank you. And the good thing about Cafecito is that there's no rules, so we can break the panel and shape the panel. So I'm going to open it up for questions, or even better, if anybody wants to make a promise today and say how they're going to change and what impact they're going to make to their brand to represent somebody on this panel in a different way and be a voice for them inside of their brand organizations, them as brand champions or stewards if you're in the agency world, we'd love to hear those promises now. So the cube, anybody's got the cube?
I'm interested in what Louise said about plus-size women. It almost seems like we should call models minus-size women. Because there's more women that are 12, 14, 16 than there are 0 and 2. So I don't know, maybe we start flipping the script about who's featured in the ads. Just a thought.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, everyone. What I've noticed is that when it comes to talking about race, gender, sexuality, everyone seems to be a bit uncomfortable or afraid that they're going to make a mistake. And honestly, we have to live in that uncomfortability. I think that a lot of times we shy away from what we actually want to say because we are afraid of how it's going to be perceived. But I guess the question to the panel is, what can we do as individuals to create a safe space, but also create a space where people feel like they're being heard, represented, and included? But also, how do we then take that and become more actionable around how do we get people into these organizations to really affect change?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's a great question.
I
Anybody?
think just using your privilege. Like, everybody has some sort of privilege on some level. So the way I think to myself is like, if I'm not spending my privilege, somebody else is going into debt, literally. Somebody else's identity, somebody else's sexuality, somebody else that wants to feel represented is going into debt. So whatever privilege you have on the spectrum, using that not just to your benefit, but to others' benefit. I think that's a great way to highlight other people and keep you learning in the process. Because the thing is, like, people aren't clocking into their jobs and thinking like, okay, now I'm not doing a great job at diversity. This is something you're living at home. This is something that your family members are representing as well. So you kind of have to be, it's bigger than just work. It's not clocking in, it's not clocking out. You literally have to, like, not transform your mind, but be open to other people's stories, their perspectives, and how it may inform you. So I think people need to think bigger outside of, I know this is an advertising, focus of a conference, but they need to think about their lives, because it's not just a checkbox, it's somebody else's reality, and I think people need to take it as serious to see those benefits come across in future generations.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a question? Ready?
One thing that I've done, I try to practice this. You talked about casting specs, and that's something we can do to affect things on a daily basis. And when I have clients, I know that they want to cast all white people. I just make them uncomfortable. I make sure I always write down, I want an African American person. I always put in people that I know they're going to have to vocalize that they don't want that to me.
That's smart.
And it's making clients uncomfortable, and making sure you put in those casting specs what you think they should be, even though you know your client doesn't want them. make your clients uncomfortable. I think that's just a little thing we can always do. And then eventually they're going to have to say yes, because you shame them into casting the character.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we can. We can and we should. And we have to wrap up, and I can talk about this all day. But let's do that. Let's please do that, because we are not considering the full spectrum of minorities. And I think as female leaders and just as creative leaders in general, you know, who cares? When have we cared what people think and how we talk and if we mess up? Because the thing is, as creatives, we can be wrong and we know how to apologize. And we say, hey, la cagamos, to use a little bit of Spanish, right? But, you know, we can say like, coño, and move on and make it better. So pull up your minorities. Think about the full spectrum every time you make a choice, whether it's in the workplace or towards creativity in media. Do that, and we're all going to help these extraordinary visionaries make a change.